Well, I pray to the Lord, He shall renew thy youth like an eagle. I praise Him first.
I picture you praying at home like 20 times a day.
I'm grateful for Estee Lauder's tender loving care, and also a wonderful makeup from Revlon called Age Defying Makeup.
You thought you knew how Tiny Tim died? But what if the truth was hidden in plain sight? And only now, decades later, it's finally come to light? For over 30 years, the world believed Tiny. Tim's death was just a tragic onstage collapse, but a shocking revelation tied to none other. Then Johnny Carson is sending shockwaves through fans and music historians alike. Could late night television's king have held the missing piece to this decades-old mystery? In this video, we're uncovering the truth behind Tiny Tim's final moments, what really led to his sudden death, and why Johnny Carson may have known more than he ever let on. Brace yourself for the untold story that's been tiptoeing just beneath the surface. Until now. A unique heritage. Tiny Tim was the product of a richly diverse cultural background. Growing up in a working-class household, Herbert was surrounded by the sounds, languages, and traditions of two very different immigrant lineages. This unique heritage would quietly shape the offbeat performer he would later become, both in his musical tastes and his eccentric public persona. His mother, Tilly Staff, was a Jewish seamstress who had immigrated from Brest-Litovsk, a city, then part of the Soviet Union and now in modern-day Belarus. Her father had been a rabbi, and her family carried with them the weight of religious tradition and the struggles of Jewish life in Eastern Europe. Tilly found work in New York's garment district, no small feat for a single woman of her background, instilling in young Herbert a strong work ethic and a sense of survival through self-expression. Boutros Ghali was born to a father from Beirut, Lebanon, and once a Catholic priest, which made the curious spiritual mix in the Ghali's household even heavier. The idea that a rabbi's daughter should cohabitate with a former priest to commence a family almost sounds like the beginning of a punchline, but it is really an indication of the fascinatingly contradictory matrix of beliefs and values that would come to inform the Tiny Tim perspective on the world, if one can. Think so much of him. Religion, music, and story were permanent fixtures in the Ghali household, though slightly more widening with Herbert's interests towards the last two. Growing up in a cultural melting pot like early 20th century New York, there was access to classical records and vaudeville tunes, ethnic folk songs, and early jazz. While many children of immigrants were being rounded up into wholesome careers, Herbert was bewitched by sounds from yesteryear, especially those that hark back to the early 1900s. To make all of them come home as the nostalgic memories his family had built through their beautiful heritage. This would then serve as the backdrop for his trademark and lifelong nostalgia about music. History, but it wasn't just his cultural heritage that shaped him. Music quickly became the true language of his soul. Childhood love for music. From an early age, Herbert Ghali, later known to the world as Tiny Tim, developed a fascination with music that would shape the rest of his life. His passion ignited when his father gifted him a wind-up phonograph and a single 78 RPM record, Beautiful Ohio, by Henry Burr. While most children might have quickly grown tired of the same tune, Herbert listened to it obsessively. He would spend hours playing it over and over, completely mesmerized by its sentimental melody and old-world charm. This early exposure to early 20th century popular Music sparked a lifelong love affair with sounds from a bygone era. Rather than simply enjoying music passively, Herbert wanted to understand how it worked. By the age of 6, he had taught himself how to play the guitar, using what he could hear on records, and see in borrowed sheet music to replicate melodies. His natural ear for music and determination to learn allowed him to expand his repertoire quickly. What began as childhood. Curiosity turned into a deep, almost scholarly passion for mastering instruments and styles that most of his peers had never even heard of. With the passing of time, music became even more of a fascination to him. Herbert picked up the violin, followed soon after by the mandolin and the ukulele, an instrument he later came to adopt as his signature. He never had any formal training, but got by on an intuitive feel for music, honing that feel with listening and about-the-clock old records. He would visit libraries and scour the shelves for sheet music, making photocopies of what caught his fancy to take home and practice endlessly. Herbert was very different from the rock and roll generation that was to become the main influence in popular music, in his combination of classical, vaudeville, and novelty tunes. Nevertheless, this self-taught immersion in music eventually became his identity. While others dismissed his musical tastes as eccentric or even outdated, Herbert cherished such old songs as incontrovertibly classic. He could hear the beauty and emotional truth in songs others had long forgotten. This blending of nostalgia, quirky voice, and increasing instrumental prowess would become the basis for his later fame as Tiny Tim, the oddball crooner who enchanted a generation with a ukulele, falsetto, and song plucked from yesterday. Discovery of his falsetto. Tiny Tim's signature falsetto, his ethereal, high-pitched singing voice, wasn't something he was born using, but something he discovered unexpectedly during a vulnerable moment in his youth. After undergoing a routine appendectomy in 1945, the young Herbert Corey spent his recovery confined to bed, where he passed the time listening to the radio. It was during this period of stillness that he stumbled upon the recordings of Rudy Vallee, a 1920s crooner known for his soft, falsetto singing style. Vallee's voice wasn't like anything Herbert had tried to emulate before, and when he attempted to sing along, something surprising happened. To his astonishment, he could not only match Vallee's notes, he could do so with effortless control and emotion. Until then, Herbert had sung in a conventional voice like any aspiring performer, unaware that he possessed such a rare vocal range. This sudden realization was more than just a fun experiment for him, it was transformative. He later described the moment as a religious experience, a personal epiphany that opened up a new realm of self-expression. It wasn't just about hitting high notes, it was about unlocking a part of himself he never knew existed. Robert took the high road toward the heart of his art at that point. From there on, he devoted himself dearly to the concept of this falsetto voice, practicing it in performance while marrying it with an ever-growing obsession for early 20th century music. Instead of leaning toward the styles of jazz, swing, or ever-evolving rock and roll like most of his peers, Herbert turned back toward the music of yesterday, channeling the spirits of long-forgotten stars like Vallee, Gene, Austin, and Henry Burr. The falsetto became Herbert's artistic signature, a personal eccentricity that was both universally adored and disdained. His open mic performances and amateur nights across New York provoked laughter. One moment confusion the next, and applause to follow as he sang in strange high registers. Awkwardness was not what he was after. The other view, possibly, was that of others tasting the novelty. He considered it his destiny. Acceptance of the new voice encouraged Herbert to step deeper into the eccentric persona that would develop into Tiny Tim. His falsetto was not merely a gimmick. It became the basis for his fame and the foundation of a career that challenged convention and expectation. Each performance brought greater confidence as he endeared the audience with his unique combination of humor and earnestness. This unique blend of characteristics made Tiny Tim an unforgettable artist, securing his place in musical history as a true original. Stage names and early struggles. Before the world came to know him as Tiny Tim, Herbert Corey spent years navigating the rough-and-tumble world of local performance under a rotating cast of eccentric stage names. He adopted monikers like Judas K. Foxglove, Texarkana Tex, Emmett Swink, and Larry Love, the Singing Canary, each one a reflection of his desire to experiment with identity and stand out in a sea of aspiring entertainers. These names weren't just for show. They were attempts to find a persona that would click with audiences as he moved from one open mic night to the next in New York's bustling but unforgiving nightclub scene. To help differentiate himself, Herbert leaned fully into theatricality and oddity. He began crafting a bizarre visual image to go with his unconventional voice, growing his hair long, powdering his face to make it appear ghostly pale, and donning flamboyant, mismatched clothing that often resembled something from a Victorian thrift store. His performances were surreal and otherworldly, equal parts sincere and unsettling. This commitment to his unique aesthetic often confused audiences and alarmed critics, but it made him impossible to ignore. Not all appreciated his oblique style, so much so that his own mother was disturbed by his behavior and appearance to the point of considering his institutionalization in Bellevue Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. His father, a supporter of Herbert's right to express himself, intervened to save his son from institutionalization. This emotionally traumatic event came at considerable personal cost, as being so radically different during a time of conformity was itself an uphill battle. Nevertheless, it was this underlying confidence in his aesthetic vision, however, obscure to others, that propelled Herbert onward. With the passage of time, continuing rejection and ridicule, and mostly performing for little or nothing, his perseverance began to pay off. His eccentric acts began attracting a cult following. In certain downtown places, especially among the fringe and underground art circles of Greenwich Village, it was the formative years for him to work out the eccentric character, sound, and style that would make him famous. Mainstream success was yet a distant dream. Through all this turmoil, he never sought to fit in. Instead, he simply went further afield into weirdness, and thus laid the groundwork for the future legend of Tiny Tim. His resolve to maintain his idiosyncratic vision earned him respect from fellow artists who prided themselves on originality, rather than conformism. His nightly performances became a spectacle mixed with humor, music, and sheer unpredictability, bewildering and enchanting audiences alike. Rise to fame as Tiny Tim. Herbert Corey's transformation into Tiny Tim marked a pivotal moment in his journey from obscure oddball to national curiosity. The name itself was adopted somewhat ironically during a period when he was performing with a band of little people in a novelty act. Standing over 6 feet tall, Herbert was a towering figure among his castmates, making the name Tiny Tim. Borrowed from the frail, kind-hearted boy in A Christmas Carol, a tongue-in-cheek choice that suited his growing reputation for offbeat, theatrical humor. But the name stuck, and soon it became inseparable from the eccentric persona he had so carefully crafted. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, Tiny Tim was grinding away on the New York City nightclub circuit, performing at open mic nights, small cabarets, and fringe venues. He began appearing regularly in Greenwich Village, a hub for avant-garde performance and countercultural experimentation. Dressed in flamboyant clothes, strumming a ukulele, and singing forgotten tunes in a haunting falsetto, he was unlike anything audiences had seen or heard before. While many initially saw him as a novelty act, his unwavering commitment to his style and encyclopedic knowledge of early American music earned him a cult following. His hard work thus duly paid off when it caught the eye of some talent scout and industry insiders who became interested in his uniqueness. He started to perform at many bigger venues. During this time, he even acquired his first paid residency at Page 3, a gay nightclub in Greenwich Village. Performing there nearly every night for hours at a time proved a great way to refine his act and cultivate a fan base. The earnings were small, reportedly just $96 a month, but it started his career and gave him the visibility to draw even more powerful attention. Tiny Tim broke into the mainstream through TV, starting with small gigs and rising to major shows like Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. His vintage style and instantly recognizable falsetto made him stand out. What began as an underground oddity grew into a pop culture phenomenon. Tiny Tim became synonymous with eccentricity, sincerity, and innocent showmanship, appealing to a 1960s audience craving something different. His genuine, bold personality struck a chord, balancing tradition and rebellion during a time of rapid change. As his eccentric stage persona took root in nightclubs, it wasn't long before film and television came calling, eager to showcase the man who seemed to have stepped straight out of another century. Breakthrough on TV and in film. Tiny Tim's rise from quirky nightclub performer to national oddity was significantly accelerated by his appearances in a string of cult films during the 1960s. One of his earliest film roles came in Jack Smith's 1963 experimental film Normal Love, where Tiny played a glamorously bizarre musical character. The film, known for its avant-garde aesthetic and surreal imagery, perfectly matched Tiny Tim's own eccentric persona. Although the film had a limited release and catered more to underground art circles, it positioned him as a performer unafraid to embrace the bizarre, something that would define his public image in the years to come. His next big screen appearance came in the 1968 counterculture documentary You Are What You Eat, where he performed several songs in his signature falsetto, including covers of I Got You Babe and Be My Baby. The film blended live performances, psychedelic visuals, and social commentary, capturing the spirit of the 1960s. Tiny Tim's segments stood out for their sheer oddity and charm, turning him into a symbol of the era's anything-goes creativity. His unique blend of nostalgia and absurdity resonated with audiences looking for alternatives to mainstream pop culture. Nonetheless, It was the television that was the real launching pad of Tiny Tim into the mainstream. He had his breakthrough moment on one of the most widely viewed variety shows of the day, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Instead of another outlandish get-up, Tiny Tim held his ukulele and executed a high-pitched rendition of Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Some were confused, some amused, but most were entranced. The striking performance immediately flashed Tiny Tim into stardom. The audience had never seen the likes of him, and that segment became one of the most talked-about moments of the show. Thanks to his memorable Laugh-In performance, Tiny Tim became a regular on shows like The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, where his humility, oddity, and talent captivated audiences. More than a one-time curiosity, he was invited back often, including for a highly rated televised wedding. His TV appearances made him a cultural phenomenon, proving there was space in mainstream America for even the most unconventional entertainer. With his quirky voice and ukulele, Tiny Tim became an unforgettable sensation, part parody, part sincerity, and full of mystery, offering something truly unique during a time of cultural change. God Bless Tiny Tim, the album. In 1968, Tiny Tim's peculiar charm was captured in full with the release of his debut album, God Bless Tiny Tim, under Reprise Records. The album served as the perfect showcase for his unique blend of early 20th century nostalgia, falsetto vocals, and ukulele-driven arrangements. Its standout track, a whimsical and haunting cover of Tiptoe Through the Tulips, originally from 1929, became a cultural sensation, with lush orchestral backing arranged by Richard Perry, who would go on to work with stars like Barbra Streisand and Carly Simon. The album struck an unlikely balance between novelty and genuine musical craftsmanship. God Bless Tiny Tim wasn't just a fluke success. It tapped into the spirit of the late 1960s counterculture, which embraced weirdness, rebellion, and the revival of forgotten art forms. The album included a variety of offbeat selections, such as Living in the Sunlight, Loving, In the Moonlight, and I Got You Babe, performed in his signature falsetto, often with tongue-in-cheek sincerity. These tracks, blending vaudevillian charm and modern psychedelia, made Tiny Tim both a curiosity and an emblem of a generation that celebrated the unexpected. For a brief time, he was as famous as any pop star, appearing on major talk shows and even in comic books. Tiny Tim, despite the near-instant success of his debut, was unable to maintain that momentum. With his subsequent releases, Tiny Tim's second album could not muster commerciality or any criticism to rival its predecessor. Suddenly, the audience felt that Tiny Tim's quirky appeal was nothing but a drunken laugh, drawing no meaning whatsoever. Within a year, as the decade veered into the 1970s, tastes in music shifted faster than anybody could imagine, and shows of vintage appeal and theatricality seemed rather outlandish amidst the booming rock and disco movements. While his core audience continued to cherish him, he quickly vanished from public sympathy. God bless Tiny Tim anyway. The album defining him and his career, capturing the apex of his fame and all the extravagance of his weird genius. Over the years, this album has achieved a cult status and is cherished for its unique standing in pop music history. It is now considered both a record of Tiny Tim's eccentric talent and a snapshot of a brief but magical period in which The mainstream made room for a falsetto-singing, ukulele-strumming time traveler from another. Whirled in a peculiar way, for countless people, the album serves as a reminder that sometimes being authentic, no matter how weird, can endear one to the world. Nowhere does this unusual medley of vaudeville, psychedelic production, and heartfelt sincerity exists or has ever existed. The album continues to influence musicians and fans alike, who believe in originality above convention. In the end, it stands as proof that even the most unconventional voices can leave a lasting echo. Later, career and personal life. Following his rapid rise and equally swift decline from mainstream fame in the late 1900s. 60s, Tiny Tim continued to pursue music with unwavering passion. Though the spotlight had dimmed, he remained a tireless performer, playing shows across the United States for devoted fans who still cherished his unique style. He performed in a variety of venues, from small-town theaters to large-scale Las Vegas shows, where his blend of nostalgia and showmanship found a comfortable home. Despite changing musical trends, Tiny Tim stayed true to his roots, often performing the same early 20th century songs that first made him famous. In an effort to maintain control over his music and adapt to the evolving industry, Tiny Tim founded his own label, aptly named Victim Records. The name itself hinted at his often self-deprecating sense of humor and possibly his feelings about being misunderstood by the mainstream music world. Through this label, he released a handful of projects that showcased both his enduring love for old-time music and his willingness to experiment with new sounds and collaborators. Although these releases did not receive widespread attention, they reflected his undying commitment to his craft and allowed him to continue recording on his own terms. Tiny Tim's personal life was as colorful and unconventional as his public persona. He married thrice, each reflecting a very different phase of life. This first marriage was to Victoria Budinger, popularly known as Miss Vicky, and this turned into a media spectacle when it was shown live on The Tonight Show in 1969. Though highly publicized, their marriage ended in divorce in 1974. He married Jan Alweis in 1984, and finally Susan Marie Gardner in 1995, who remained by his side until his death. But for all the seeming chaos in his career, little did anyone imagine that Tiny Tim, however troubled in life, could be so earnest about love and companionship. Before and after fame. Although many dismissed him as a novelty act, the later years of Tiny Tim reveal a very dedicated artist and complex human being. He didn't mind whether he was performing for thousands in Vegas or small crowds in out-of-the-way towns. He was happy to regard himself an entertainer. Offstage, he was a shy, very religious, old-fashioned man with deep beliefs and good manners. In the face of an increasingly mainstream culture, Tiny Tim never did. He remained, right up to the end, exactly the same strange and sincere performer that tiptoed through the tulips and into America's collective memory. He amassed rare sheet music dating back to yore and always scouted for long-forgotten songs to be revived. His love for the preservation of old American music was as passionate as the passion he showed for performing. In his own eccentric little way, Tiny Tim became a quiet custodian of musical history. Tiny Tim's underground renaissance. Although Tiny Tim's mainstream fame largely faded by the mid-1970s, he experienced a notable resurgence during the 1980s and 1990s, thanks in part to a new generation of fans who found charm in his eccentricity and nostalgia. This period saw him embraced not just as a novelty act, but as a cult icon among underground and indie music circles. Artists who had grown up watching his surreal TV performances now saw him as a kindred spirit, someone unafraid to be completely himself. This newfound appreciation opened the door for collaborations that blended his vintage sensibilities with modern, alternative sounds. One of the most surprising partnerships during this era was his work with the indie rock band Camper Van Beethoven in 1986. Known for their eclectic style and offbeat humor, the band saw in Tiny Tim a fellow musical outsider. Their collaboration introduced him to audiences that might never have encountered his music otherwise, and it helped reaffirm his relevance in a rapidly evolving music scene. These types of partnerships proved that Tiny Tim wasn't simply clinging to the past. He was willing to adapt, experiment, and engage with artists well outside the mainstream. Tiny Tim also hopped genre films into some unforgettable moments, for instance, starring in Blood Harvest in 1987. The film featured an alien but surreal clown, Mervo, somewhat like that, name which incorporated his unnaturally disturbing presence with that of a darker, theatrical voice. The film, however, couldn't make such a mark at the box office, but it soon managed to create fans and ardent followers among the fanatical horror enthusiasts in his weird, yet fascinating image. The role offered him a chance to dip his toes in the darker side of his persona, while at the same time using the very same eccentric energy that made up his career. In the long run of the 80s and 90s, Tiny Tim still produced and distributed his albums, which included Rock, 1993, I Love Me, 1993, and lastly, Girl, 1996. These albums were filled with songs ranging from covers and originals and themes that frequently combined kitsch with sincerity and eccentric humors. Not one of the records ever went into the charts, yet they did find their way to the most passionate fans and collectors to keep the heritage alive in what would prove to be lean years for many. This phase of creativity has proved again that Tiny Tim was no mere flash in the pan, but was actually a committed player who stayed with his art until the end. He played small venues and radio shows and even wedding events, never refusing an opportunity to perform. It betrayed its owner's love for entertaining when it demonstrated endurance under a fortune, fading fame. In his own eccentric way, Tiny Tim demonstrated that staying power in showbiz had not always to do with chart toppers, but even as Tiny Tim embraced a late career revival, his relentless devotion to the stage would soon come at a heartbreaking cost. Tragic final performance and death. Tiny Tim's lifelong devotion to performing ultimately led to a heartbreaking conclusion. In September 1996, while appearing at a ukulele festival in Montague, Massachusetts, he suffered a major heart attack on stage. The incident shocked fans, though those close to him knew he had long struggled with serious health issues, including cardiovascular disease and diabetes. He was rushed to the hospital, where he spent several weeks recovering. Doctors strongly advised him to stop performing immediately, warning that his body could not endure the strain of live shows. For most, it would have been the final curtain call, but not for Tiny Tim. Despite the medical warnings, Tiny Tim made the fateful decision to return to the stage just 2 months later. He couldn't imagine a life without performing, and he reportedly told friends and family that bringing joy to others through music was worth any risk. On November 30th, 1996, he took part in a gala benefit for the Women's Club of Minneapolis, even though he had complained of feeling unwell earlier that day. Determined not to disappoint his fans, he insisted on going forward with the performance, embodying his lifelong mantra of showmanship above all else. Tiny Tim collapsed during his final number, appropriately named Tiptoe Through the Tulips, which had made him famous all those years ago. It was an unfortunate circumstance that, again, happened on stage. As the audience shuffled out, somewhat bewildered at what had just happened, his wife, Susan Marie Gardner, came to his side. He told her he was not feeling well, and with that, he collapsed. Paramedics who arrived quickly attempted CPR and then transported him to a hospital in the vicinity. Tiny Tim was pronounced dead. He had suffered yet another heart attack despite all resuscitation attempts. He was only 64 years old. Burial was in Lakewood Cemetery, Minneapolis, for Tiny Tim, a man whose legacy was strange, but heartfelt. Most thought him a novelty or merely an eccentric, but the truth was that Tiny Tim's love of music and performance, walking on stage, knowing death was at his door, was profound and genuine. Thus, his tragic last performance was somehow a most fitting, albeit excruciatingly painful, denouement for one who had lived a life on stage. Tiny Tim died singing. To an audience, his ukulele in one hand and his familiar falsetto sinking gently into the ethers. One last time, his end signified the death of an era and made the point of his uniqueness, an uniqueness that never once wavered in its resolve. His death was mourned, of course, by his fans and even fellow musicians, but more so for the vanishing of a brand of fearlessness in eccentricism not very often witnessed in show business. In subsequent years, his story continued to grow, giving rise to yet another generation that embraces the weird, the whimsical, and the wonderful. And there you have it, the chilling truth behind Tiny Tim's final curtain call, and the surprising connection to Johnny Carson that's only now coming to light. What do you think? Was there more to his death than we ever knew? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If you found this video as fascinating as we did, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to tap the bell icon so you never miss another deep dive into music's most mysterious stories. And if you're hungry for more, go ahead and click the video on your screen. Right now, you won't believe what we uncovered next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.